Hi everyone, welcome to my channel and welcome to today's video. I have never done a video of this type on this channel before, so I'm really excited to do it. We are going to be doing a Quicksilver full summary and recap in preparation for the Brimstone release this week. Before we get started, my name is Emily and I just want to say thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you like it and I hope it's helpful if you didn't get a chance to reread Quicksilver before the Brimstone release this week. Okay, I have a feeling that this is going to be a very long video, so we are going to jump right into it, and I'm going to be breaking the summary down into 5 parts. I have everything written down in the notes app on my phone, so I spent the morning typing this summary up. So I'm not sure if this format is going to work because I've never done a video like this before, but we're gonna give it a try. The first part of this summary is chapters 1 through 5, which is in Zilvaren. Then we're going to chapters 6 through 15, which takes place at the Winter Palace. The third part is chapters 16 through 27, which is Cahlish, Innír, and Ballard. And then we'll move on to chapter 28 to 33, and I titled that section Lots of Alchemy. And then the 5th part is going to just be the ending and everything that happens in the ending of this book. Okay, so part 1, Zilvaren. Okay, we meet our female main character whose name is Sayrys Fane, and Sayrys lives in the poorest ward in the city of Zilvaren. Zilvaren is ruled by an immortal queen named Madra, who is honestly very unjust and unfair. The world that Zilvaren is in is a very unique world. There's 2 suns and they also never set, so it's always daytime, and it's very desert-like. Water is severely rationed. They don't have a lot of resources. There's a lot of disease in the ward that Sayrys lives in. It's not a great place to live. Sayrys has an encounter with a guardian, which is one of the castle guards, because she is trying to steal a piece of his golden armor. She's able to escape by climbing over the wall that divides the wards, and when she gets to the top, she kind of slams the gauntlet down on top of the wall, and the sand and particles on top of the wall kind of react to her in a strange way. She also starts to hear a faint voice, which is very interesting. And we learn a bit later that this isn't uncommon for her. She kind of has an ability to interact with metal in a unique way, but she does have to keep this hidden because things like that are forbidden in the world that she lives in. We're also introduced to her mentor and father figure, whose name is Elroy, and he works in a glassmaking shop, so she kind of has learned her way around a forge and things like that. And we're also introduced to her brother, whose name is Hayden. And the last character we're introduced to in the beginning is possibly the best side character in existence of any book I've ever read, and his name is Carrion Swift. So Hayden and Carrion had gotten into a little bit of a tiff, and I think Sayrys had actually bargained that Carrion would leave her brother alone in exchange for her not interfering with Carrion's supply lines. He's kind of like a smuggler, and he brings resources into the ward and out of the ward. So Sayrys goes to confront Carrion, and she leaves the bag with the gauntlet with her brother outside of this tavern bar type thing. Carrion kind of dances around the fact that he knows that Sayrys took this gauntlet and is warning her to get it out of the ward. They get in a bit of an argument, and we also find out that Sayrys and Carrion had a bit of a fling a few months ago that he kind of taunts her about a little bit. And Carrion is basically just the epitome of a cheeky boy, and that's his character. He has a lot of great lines throughout this book, and if you've read this book, you know and love Carrion probably as much as I do. Okay, so then Hayden starts acting like a typical dumb younger brother, and he leaves the tavern and where Sayrys left him, and he runs into guardians, and now he has this golden armor in his possession, and they obviously think that he stole it. So now obviously Sayrys needs to intervene. She feels very responsible for her brother, and she ends up fighting, and I think she ends up killing some of the guardians and severely wounding some of the guardians. So she obviously gets arrested and taken to the castle, and she's put into the dungeons in the castle to await her fate. A guardian named Heron takes her and escorts her to this large room where she's not really sure what's going on. He's kind of taunting her. She's talking back and saying we don't have any water, how can you even do this? How can you stand by this? What's wrong with you? And in the room that they're in where he takes her, there's it's like I said, a large room, and there's a weird basin pool with some kind of solid substance in the middle of it, and then there's something sticking out of that pool. So then Heron and Sayrys exchange some more words. Then Queen Madra comes in, who's honestly bone chilling as a character. If you listen to the audiobook, the way that the narrator voices the queen is just makes my skin crawl. Queen Madra taunts Sayrys, basically explains to her hey, because you did this, your entire ward is going to be put to death and it's all your fault. Sayrys is obviously freaking out about this, trying to say please don't do this. The ward didn't do anything wrong. It's me. I stole the gauntlet. Madra leaves. She is I really don't care. She gets out of there, and then Heron and Sayrys start fighting. Sayrys is mortally wounded, and as kind of a Hail Mary, she climbs towards that pool that she saw when she first entered this room, and she realizes that the object that's stuck in the basin is actually a sword. Things are happening with that solid substance. It's starting to move. The dagger that Heron was using is starting to melt. Weird things are happening with metal, and Sayrys pulls this sword from the pool, and somehow the substance that the sword was in kind of like activates and starts moving. Weird things are happening. Harren is screaming at her to stop, like put it back. He's like, don't turn the key, don't open the gate. Sarys has no idea what's going on. We learned in a little while that this substance is actually Quicksilver. Quicksilver can actually create portals between worlds, and Sarys has the ability to interact and activate and, you know, work with this Quicksilver metal. Now Sarys is on the brink of death. She's probably not going to make it. As a Hail Mary, she's trying to take this sword and bring it to Harren to end him because he's the one who did this to her. But now that this pool is activated, a figure emerges from the pool. Sarys describes him as looking like death. We get one of the best lines from the entire book, in my opinion, at this point. The character that emerges from the pool looks at Sarys and says, "Graceless gods, what's this? A joke?" It really reminds me of the line that Rhysand says when he first meets Feyre in ACOTAR, when he says, "There you are, I've been looking for you." I feel like those lines kind of have the same energy, and I just love that line. I feel like it's like the catalyst of everything that happens after this. This character ends up being our male main character, whose name is Kingfisher. But really, we love that energy from a male main character. We don't really know why he feels this way. We're trying to figure out what's happening. Where's Sarys going? Harren's basically dead because the metal from the Quicksilver like is choking him, and Kingfisher is like, "You're doomed, you're done for." And Kingfisher is wearing a pendant around his neck, and he takes it off and places it onto Sarys. He picks her up and he brings her through this pool of Quicksilver. Sarys loses consciousness as they're descending into the pool, and that's that. Moving into part 2 of this recap, this is chapters 16 through 15, and this is like the chapters that take place at the Winter Palace. So Sarys comes to days later. We learn that she is currently in the Winter Palace in a world called Yavelia, and we also learned that the Fae are real. So Sarys had grown up hearing stories about Fae, but they were allegedly extinct, but she's meeting Fae now. She's in this Fae world of Yavelia. So this is a classic story of human girl enters Fae world, and we love that. She's being tended to by someone named Everlane, who we learn is a Fae royal, and we also meet another character named Renfis, who is a Fae warrior. Everlane and Renfis have some kind of relationship, like they've known each other for years, they've grown up together. So Renfis comes in and is like, "Hey, I need that pendant back for Kingfisher." Sarys is trying to figure things out. She's asking Everlane a lot of questions, obviously, and all she wants to do is get back to Zilvaren so she can save her brother, but Everlane is like, "Yeah, no shot of that. You're here now, and you need to come and meet the king." We learn that Sarys is an alchemist who has the ability to control this Quicksilver substance. This is a very rare gift, and it hasn't been seen for quite some time. We also learn that the king is Everlane's father, and he's also a piece of garbage. I do want to pause here to do some like quick family tree stuff before we move on, because this is kind of information that's sprinkled over the next several chapters, so we'll just get it out of the way all at once. Okay, so Fisher's parents are Adina and Finron. King Bellicon, because he's a piece of garbage, actually had banished Finron many, many years ago, and we learn later that Finron actually is in Zilvaren. He probably died in Zilvaren. I'm not entirely sure. We don't really know what happened to Finron, but we just know that he's like assumed dead. King Bellicon then forces Adina to marry him. Adina and Bellicon have Everlane. Adina also dies after having Everlane, and then obviously Everlane and Kingfisher are half siblings. Back in the throne room, the king tasks Sarys with learning about the Quicksilver and reactivating these portals between the worlds because she is an alchemist and this gift is so rare. Kingfisher is then brought in, and he's currently like absolutely feral because he isn't wearing that pendant that he had given to Sarys. This is the pendant that Renfis had asked for, but it seems like he didn't get a chance to give it back to Kingfisher before this scene is happening. We get bits and pieces of the past that Sarys is kind of trying to piece together, but we learn that Kingfisher has been gone for about 100 years. Bellicon is basically saying he's returned from his banishment before it's been up. Everyone is calling Kingfisher like the bane of Gillethyre. The king keeps calling him the dog. There's a lot of back and forth, but like Sarys feels like that something isn't right about like the pageantry of all of this, so she doesn't really believe what's happening and like what the king is saying. Kingfisher's been gone for about 100 years. Everlane and Renfis haven't seen him in that time, and then something happened during this battle of Gillethyre, and that's why Kingfisher is known as the bane of Gillethyre. It's kind of assumed that like hundreds of thousands of civilians were killed during this battle of Gillethyre. We also learn at some point throughout all of this that Kingfisher has Quicksilver living inside of him, and it's actually driving him mad. It causes him a lot of pain. It gives him a lot of hallucinations and delusions, and that's kind of why he's like freaking out and like being so unhinged while he's like brought in during this scene, and it's because he's not wearing this pendant. So he really needs this pendant. Bellicon is really putting on a show and making it seem like Kingfisher should be executed, but through some intervention with some of the other characters, that doesn't happen, and basically the king ends up tasking Kingfisher now with helping Cerys learn about the Quicksilver because he's used to it. It also lives inside of him. The king gives him a week to help Cerys. He has to go to the battlefront because there's also a war going on. So he's sending him to the front lines of this war. So quick side note, there is a war going on between Yvelia and another country called Sansaroth. It's been going on for like 1,000 years, but we'll talk more about the specifics of that later. Right now, we just need to know that there's a war going on. Then we get a lot of chapters where Cerys is kind of like rebelling against the idea of being in Yvelia, rebelling against the idea of learning about this Quicksilver, because really she just cares about getting home and helping Elroy and Hayden and the people in her ward. She also is convinced that they're probably all dead because of what Madra said, so she has no interest in being in Yvelia. Even though she's surrounded by like all of this abundance and as much water as she could possibly need, which is obviously completely different than her life back in Zilvaren, but she really just needs to get home to care for her family and her friends and make sure everyone's okay. She is learning more about her abilities as an alchemist, but again, she's a little naturally curious about it, but she really just doesn't care. She wants to get home and she wants to save Hayden. So Kingfisher and Cerys start working together in the forge, trying to learn more about her abilities and how much control she has over this Quicksilver. Kingfisher is acting like a total asshole towards her. Even though he's being incredibly rude, he is still teaching her about her abilities, how to use them, a little bit about like the world and everything that's going on. And even though he is so abrasive and rude towards her, Cerys is intrigued by him and naturally drawn to him. Also, another side note, while working in the forge, they find a fox, which Cerys kind of adopts and names him Onyx. Cerys and Fisher keep working together. They like provoke each other. They end up kissing. And while this is happening, Cerys steals a ring from him that he's wearing, which he says is a relic. She believes that this ring is a relic because he alluded to it, and a relic is basically something that allows you to travel through the Quicksilver unharmed. So the pendant that Kingfisher wears is also one of these relics. So she thinks that this ring is also a relic, so she steals it and runs towards the Quicksilver pool that's in this palace so she can get home to Zilvaren. She is stopped before she goes through the pool by Kingfisher, and he reveals that the ring isn't actually a relic and that she would have died if she went through the Quicksilver. So here they strike a bargain. Kingfisher says that he will go to Zilvaren and try to bring back one of the humans that she loves so much, so Elroy or Hayden, if she agrees to stay and make relics for all of his people. So Cerys is desperate, she agrees to this, and then they make a blood oath. So Kingfisher goes through the Quicksilver pool and he returns a little while later with who we assume is Hayden, but then we get our first like big twist, I think. I loved this part of the book so much. It's not actually Hayden. He ends up bringing Carrion back through the Quicksilver pool, and now Carrion is in Yvelia with Cerys and Kingfisher. Okay, so now that we have Kingfisher, Carrion, and Cerys all together, they decide to take matters into their own hand. Kingfisher's like, we're blowing this joint, we're getting out of here, and they flee the castle. They go through a shadow gate, but not before they stop at this tavern where the patrons of this tavern kind of treat Kingfisher like he is a hero. So Cerys is still like, what is your deal, dude? Like, all of these people back at the castle were calling for your death, but now we're here in this tavern and they're all treating you like you're some kind of hero. Like, what is going on? And he's being evasive. He's not answering a lot of questions. But they go through this shadow gate, which is like also another type of portal magic over short distances, and they end up in Cahlish. So this is part 3 of the recap. We are now doing chapters 16 through 27. These take place in Cahlish, Erin, I believe, which is the name of the war camp, and a town called Ballard, and they kind of like go back and forth between some of these locations over the next few chapters. Cahlish is the estate where Fisher and his family grew up. So this was before his mother was forced to marry King Bellicon. It's his childhood home. It's very peaceful and quiet and a beautiful place to grow up in. Now that they're away from the castle, Cerys needs to keep trying to figure out how to make these relics with the Quicksilver so she can fulfill her oath and her bargain to Kingfisher. However, she learns that there's like thousands of relics that she has to create, and also she has to figure out how to create them anyway. She has no idea how the Quicksilver would bind with these things to create these relics. So like there's like rings and other necklaces and things like that that are supposed to be given to Kingfisher's army so they can travel through the Quicksilver. So she's basically like, you tricked me, like I didn't know that all of this was what needed to be done. You also didn't even bring me the person that I wanted. And he's like, well, you struck the bargain, you pay the price. She is a little less worried now because Carrion, when he comes to, does tell her that Hayden is safe. He found a job for Hayden. He put him up in an apartment in a different ward. So she's a little less worried about him now, but like still she wants to get home and save her brother and make sure he's okay. Carrion also tells her that like the third ward is safe and Madra didn't do what she said she was gonna do. So Cerys is kind of like, why? Like, what was the point of her telling me this if it wasn't true? We also meet another adorable side character named Archer, who is a fire sprite, and he works for the family. He's kind of like a butler for them, and he also was like a father figure to Fisher when he was growing up. Fisher says that he was like the first being to hold Fisher after his parents. I think Archer is like one of the cutest parts of this book. I think he is absolutely adorable, and Fisher does treat Archer with kindness, and Archer seems to really love Fisher. So again, Saris is like so confused, and she can't really reconcile this like broody person that she's come to know with how people are responding towards him. So she knows that like something happened to him, like something's causing him to be this way. She begins working in the forge at Cahlish to try and start figuring out this relic thing and how she can build them. She has a lot of unsuccessful attempts and setbacks, and she's getting nowhere. Fisher and Saris then have dinner together with a lot of banter, and this is like one of my favorite parts of the book. But then feeders attack this dinner, and Saris is injured by one of the feeders. All right, so I thought I'd pause here now that we're talking about the feeders and explain the war a little bit more, and these are just like bits and pieces that come throughout the course of the book. Thousands of years ago, a blood curse was placed on the Fae as a punishment. This caused them to need to drink blood, and they became monstrous, and it was really supposed to be a punishment, and that's why they have like pointed canine teeth, because of their time when they had this blood curse placed upon them. Eventually, a cure is found for this blood curse, but there were some of the Fae who didn't like how short their lifespans would be, even though they were thousands of years long, and they wanted true immortality. So they embraced this blood curse that was supposed to be a punishment and kind of used it to their advantage to try to become completely immortal. So the war that's currently happening is between the Sansaroth army of like vampire Fae and feeders, and the Avelian Fae cured of the blood curse thousands of years ago. The feeders are basically like mindless foot soldiers who can't really think for themselves because they were bitten by vampires and turned into this like undead being. And they will basically obey anything their masters tell them to do. They're completely mindless. And also, silver is the only thing that can truly kill the vampires, and the feeders you need to completely behead in order to kill them. But like Belicon is withholding silver from them. He's withholding resources and food from them. So again, it's like, what is going on like in this war? Why is Belicon withholding the things that they would need to win the war? Once Saris recovers from her injury, they actually move to the war camp, which is closer to the front lines of this war, and Saris begins working in the forge there. Okay, so then there's some training scenes, there's some scenes in the forge, a lot of scenes where they're kind of just like learning more about each other and working through their issues and their problems that they're facing and things like that. In the forge, Saris starts learning how to communicate and work with the Quicksilver, because the Quicksilver is actually sentient and it can communicate with people like Saris who are alchemists. If you listen to the audiobook, I actually love how the narrators voice the Quicksilver. It makes it just feel so eerie and spooky and like really like it's like some otherworldly being that's speaking to you. A lot of the time, the Quicksilver also chants a phrase, Anarath Mor, and we don't really know what that means, but it scares Kingfisher, so we know that it's probably important. So she's like learning to communicate with the Quicksilver and sense it and learn how to work with it. Then we have a moment between Saris and Kingfisher where they finally kiss again, and there's one of my favorite parts in the entire book that follows this scene where Fisher places Saris's hand over his chest so she can feel how hard his heart is beating, and it says like it means something, and I just like completely swooned at that part of the book. I love that chapter so much. It's probably my favorite chapter in the whole book. Saris and Fisher are learning more about each other, but Fisher is still being very distant from the other soldiers and the other people in this camp. Like, he hasn't really spoken to them as a whole yet. He's afraid of like what they're going to say because he's been gone for so long. But he finally speaks with them, and one of the officers, whose name is Danya, tries to attack him. And in this moment, Saris like stands up and is like, no, you can't do that. And Danya's sword completely shatters into like over 500 pieces, and it like sticks in the wall, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, we have an alchemist. Like, where did this come from? Right after this, Sansaroth attacks and a battle ensues. And it's a short battle. There's not a lot of casualties. We learn that Malcolm is the king of the vampires, and he's obviously evil. Malcolm kind of taunts Fisher throughout this scene, like basically like saying like, come back to play with me. You know, you miss me. Like, you've been with me for so long. Like, come back. And the soldiers are obviously like, what? He's been with Malcolm? Like, what's going on? So like, again, we're starting to put the pieces together of where Kingfisher has been for the past 100 years. After this, Kingfisher and Saris finally hook up, and in the morning, Kingfisher just like pieces out and leaves, and she also wakes up and she has a new tattoo, and Kingfisher won't really tell her what that means and like why it's happening. So then there's more training scenes, there's more forge scenes. We also learn about the Lupo Proelia, I think I'm saying that right, and that's basically Kingfisher's like most elite warriors, and that includes Renfis, it includes Danya, actually. There's one other side character that I haven't mentioned yet whose name is Lorith, and he's also part of that Lupo Proelia. And we love Lorith. He's a great side character as well. I just didn't mention him yet. Okay, then Kingfisher takes Cerys to Ballard where a small celebration is going on, and they share a nice moment together at this celebration. They stay at a small apartment over a bakery in one of the surrounding towns where the celebration is taking place, and it turns out like that this was his mother's apartment. In the middle of the night, Fisher has a really bad Quicksilver episode, and Cerys kind of helps him through it, even though at first Fisher is like, no, I don't need your help, get away from me. But Cerys convinces him like, no, I'm staying, I'm going to take care of you. While she's helping him through it, they also kind of share a little bit about each other. We learn about Cerys's family and her past growing up in Zilvaren. We learned that her mother was killed and kind of how she became a thief and how she started to learn how to take care of her younger brother Hayden and why she works in the forge with Elroy. After this, they get together again, and afterwards, Cerys has all these marks all over her hands and wrists, and Fisher doesn't really tell her much about them. He says that she can choose if she wants to keep them or not, and he has the ability to like hide them from her skin for the time being. He really doesn't offer any other information up, but again, all of these marks appeared on her hands and wrists, but Fisher hides them for her. This is part 4 of the summary now, and I'm titling this section Lots of Alchemy, and these are chapters 28 through 33. Okay, so Cerys keeps working in the forge. Carrion is helping her, and she can't figure out how to get this Quicksilver to bind with the other metals, how to make these relics. She is really struggling to find a solution for this problem. Carrion suggests, have you just asked the Quicksilver? And Cerys is like, that's ridiculous. But then as she's thinking about it, she says that, yeah, I can communicate with it, so why don't I try asking nicely? So like I said, the Quicksilver is sentient, and this actually works. The Quicksilver says that like, we'll work with you and help you build this new sword that she's working on if you offer us up a song. Seems like an easy enough bargain, so she's like, yeah, of course, I'll go for that. And she forges a sword from the pieces of the sword that she originally shattered that Danya was originally the wielder of. When she's done forging it, Lorith sings a song, but once he's done singing the song, the Quicksilver is like, we will allow Lorith to wield us and we'll also channel magic for him. So now the sword becomes a god sword, which is a sword that's able to channel magic, and these swords haven't really been seen in this realm for thousands of years. As soon as this happens though, everyone like forgets about the song that Lorith sang, and I feel like this is just a really interesting part of the book where like the Quicksilver took the song as part of the bargain that Cerys and the Quicksilver made, and now she's the only one that remembers this song. Okay, so then another battle happens, and Cerys fights alongside with everyone, but during this battle, Taladeus, who is Malcolm's second in command, approaches the banks of the river that's across from the war camp, and he has Everlane captive. It's revealed that Malcolm kidnapped Everlane and also bit her. Everlane will become enthralled to Malcolm unless the crew can find a way to like reverse this enthrallment and rescue her, but they'd have like not a lot of time to make this happen, so everyone isn't very hopeful about this, but they're throwing themselves into it and they're going to figure out a way to make this work. Taladeus tells Fisher that Malcolm is waiting to broker a deal with him in the place where they struck their first bargain. Loris, Ren, Cerys, and Fisher try to start to strategize like how they can get out of this situation. It looks very bleak, and Everlane's either going to die or become enthralled to Malcolm, which will also end in death. They all return to Cahlish, and Danya actually comes with them, and Carrion is there as well, and they're all just starting to try and figure out what they can do in this situation. So that was a quick part of the summary, so now we're moving into part 5, which is the ending, so this is chapters 34 through the end. Cerys starts making relics as fast as she can because now she knows how to work with the Quicksilver and how to convince it to bond with other metal. The Quicksilver is asking her for things like secrets or jokes or more songs, and like that's the bargains that they're asking for, which again I just think is a really interesting concept in this book. As she's working in the forge, Taylina, who is Calish's healer, comes to see her to see like, hey, like, are you okay? Do you need my services? And Cerys notices all these marks on Taylina's hands, and after she notices this, a conversation ensues where we learn what these marks actually mean. We learn that the marks that appeared on Cerys's hand after her and Fisher got together were actually marks from the fates depicting that like she is mated to Fisher. So it basically marks them as like true mates by the fates. And the marks around her wrists are actually god bindings, which means that their union is like blessed by the gods themselves. And Taylina also tells us that in the stories where Fae mates had these god bindings, they always ended in tragedy. So Cerys is like, what the heck? She confronts Fisher, they argue, she confronts him for keeping these things from her, and Fisher is saying like, I'm doing it for your own good, you should not be mated to me, I am going to go mad, I'll be dangerous, like you deserve better. And Sayrus is basically like, you can't make that decision for me. Eventually they reconcile and they decide like, we'll continue this after Everlane is safe, like then we'll worry about Fisher and like what's going on with him. Through their research, they realize that the old witches of Yvelia might be able to help break this enthrallment. And Fisher says that there's half witches living in Yvelia, so he travels there and there's only one witch after Danya actually insults some of them, but one of the witches named Ishabal decides to help them and she travels back to Cahlish with Fisher. Fisher and Sayrus share one more night together, and when Sayrus wakes up in the morning, Fisher is gone and there's a note basically saying that Fisher is going to meet Malcolm and he's going to turn himself in to save Everlane. So Fisher's gone. Back at Cahlish, the group is scrambling to try to figure out what to do, and they realize that once Fisher sends Everlane through a shadow gate, they can go back through the shadow gate that he opened to reach Fisher and like rescue him now. Once this shadow gate opens, Everlane falls through. Everlane crashes through like from the shadow gate that like opens in the middle of the air, and Ren doesn't make it through the shadow gate, but Lorith, Carrion, and Sayrus make it through the shadow gate in time before it closes. All right, now we are finally at the final chapters where the final battle ensues and a lot of revelations come out. The shadow gate brings them to this amphitheater, which I think is in Gillethyre, which is where that battle took place like 100 years ago that everyone was calling Kingfisher the Bane of Gillethyre for. And here we are shocked to learn that Bellicon and Malcolm and Madra are actually all working together somehow. Bellicon actually doesn't care about this war with Sansaroth because Bellicon and Malcolm are in it together, and Bellicon is keeping up this war as like basically a front so he can feed his brother's army because they're brothers. And then Madra is somehow involved in this, like she has been living in Zilvaren for the past 1,000 years, like away from them, and the portals were blocked because she closed them, but like they immediately get over this and they're like, yeah, we'll work together again. We learn that during the Battle of Gillethyre, Fisher decides he's going to try and meet with Malcolm on his own to either like broker a deal or try and kill him himself. When he gets there, he realizes that Malcolm and Bellicon are working together. So this is like, again, 100 years ago when this Battle of Gillethyre actually took place. Now that he's realizing that Malcolm and Bellicon are actually allies, he says, let's broker a deal to try and save the remaining citizens of Gillethyre. And the proposed bargain is a coin toss, and I'm actually going to read the bargain directly from the book for this section. So the deal that they broker, let me just find the part in this book. It says, they were going to do a coin toss. He found a coin, one only used in Gillethyre, the smallest denomination. He said if the coin hit the ground and landed leaf side up, Malcolm would call off his horde and leave the city without hurting another living thing. But if the coin hit the ground and landed fish side up, he would take the city as his own and destroy it, and I would have to leave those still alive to their deaths and meet him on the field of battle at a later date. Then Bellicon says he also wasn't allowed to touch the coin or influence the way it fell. While the coin toss was being decided, he wasn't allowed to harm me or my brother. Not a hair on either of our heads, and until the outcome of the coin toss had been decided, he wasn't allowed to speak of the deal or the fact that Malcolm and I were brothers. They flip the coin, and then Malcolm actually catches it from the air. So Malcolm catches the coin before it hits the ground, and that means that Fisher can't harm either of them, he can't speak of the deal, and he was essentially tricked. But then at this point, because every single citizen in the city of Gillethyre had been turned into a feeder, Kingfisher gives the order to burn the city down, and that's where like his Bane of Gillethyre title comes from. Because Kingfisher gave this order and basically like got rid of all of Malcolm's feeders that he just created in Gillethyre, Malcolm then devises this elaborate labyrinth to torment and torture Fisher, and that's where he's been stuck for the past 100 years. Also surrounding the labyrinth is all of like the reanimated bodies of the Fae that lived in Gillethyre, and they are chanting Anarath more, and that's where that phrase had come from, and what that means is release us, or like release me. So that has been tormenting Fisher for 100 years. Okay guys, we're almost at the end. Fighting ensues, there's a lot going on. Fisher tries to kill Bellicon. They escape into the labyrinth. Then they fight this demon, and it's honestly one of like the most grotesquely described demons that I've ever read in a book. So they fight this demon, they make it to the center of the labyrinth. The center of the labyrinth is filled with like thousands of coins that Fisher had been like searching through to try and find the one that was used during their bargain to try and like flip it so it can hit the ground. So this labyrinth is like truly evil. At some point, Malcolm catches up to them in the center of the labyrinth. Carrion is taunting him. He's like, yeah, come and bite me. So Malcolm goes and starts to feed on Carrion and bites him. Malcolm starts to like deteriorate really fast, and we learn that Carrion is actually the heir to the Yevelian throne, and he was secreted away to Zilvaren 1,000 years ago, and he's been stuck there ever since. So Malcolm is deteriorating, and this is because Carrion's father's blood was used to create the cure for the blood curse. So Malcolm can't drink it because it's the cure to the blood curse, basically. It should be deadly to him, but because he's been alive for so long, he is really just weakened. It's not immediately killing him, but because he's in this weakened state, he should be able to be killed at this point. Also, as a side note, Bellicon ordered the murder of Carrion's parents because of this blood curse, blood cure kind of thing. And that's why Kingfisher's dad ends up bringing him through the Quicksilver to Zilvaren to keep Carrion safe. Okay, so at this point, Fisher tells Saris that the coin that was used to do the coin flip bargain must have contained Quicksilver, and all of the coins that they're currently standing on in the center of the labyrinth aren't real because Malcolm is able to stand on them and they're pure silver. He tells Saris to like use her abilities as an alchemist to try and find this coin. She does find the coin. She is able to flip the coin and release Fisher from the bargain. However, she does have an encounter with Malcolm during this, and she is mortally wounded. Fisher finds her. He says that he'll give her part of his soul to save her, but that's not possible because he had already done this for Lorith to save Lorith's life many years ago. She also disagrees and says like, no, you absolutely can't do that. I will never forgive you if you sacrifice yourself for me. Like, I don't want you to do that, and you can't take away my free will. However, it turns out that Taladeus, Malcolm's second, is also able to turn Saris into a vampire, and this would save her life. So Taladeus offers to turn her into a vampire to save her life. Kingfisher agrees to this, and as this transition starts, Saris is like swept away and pulled through the Quicksilver pool. Saris ends up somewhere where she's able to communicate with the gods, and she has a conversation with Bal and Mithrin, and they're like these daughters of Zareth, the god of chaos. The twins bring Saris to speak to Zareth, and Zareth tells her a lot of information in a very short period of time. What we learn is that Zareth has been interfering with the universe for hundreds of years to keep Saris and Fisher apart, but no matter what he does, the universe finds a way to bring them together. He also had brought Fisher to speak to him like many years ago, so Fisher and Zareth have had conversations before in the past. Now Zareth is talking to Saris. There's something about Saris and Fisher that is really important for like the trajectory of the universe. He basically tells Saris that like Kingfisher and her meeting and their bond is some kind of like axis on which like the threads of the universe are going to either like completely fray or like save the world. He also tells her that the god bindings on Saris's wrists mark her and Fisher as his wards, and that they're like under his protection kind of. And then he also turns Saris into a half Fae, half vampire hybrid because that's something that the universe won't be able to recognize. And because she is now unrecognizable to the universe, the fates can't really interfere like with her and Fisher's relationship. So it's like some kind of way to like keep them safe, but we don't really know like what the repercussions are of this at this point in the story. We'll probably get some answers about that in Brimstone, but like that's all we really know about that in Quicksilver. Anyway, he sends her back through the Quicksilver, she reawakens, and now her transition is complete and she is like half Fae, half vampire. Our final cliffhanger is Fisher telling Saris that because she killed Malcolm, she is now to be crowned the next Queen of Sansaroth. And that's where the book ends. I have no idea how long this video is going to be after it's edited, so if it's super long, I apologize, but I hope it was helpful and it helped you prep for Brimstone if you didn't have a chance to reread Quicksilver. If you have any theories about Brimstone or what you think is going to happen in the next books in the series, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear them. I also think I'm going to make a playlist for this book, so I'll put that link in the description as well, just for fun, because why not? All right, I think that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching this. Like I said, I hope it was helpful to you. If you did find it helpful, please do those classic YouTube things like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.